Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I continue to be surprised and disappointed at the number of Zimbabweans who continue to argue that they must participate in the so-called Geza 31st March uprising. On the one hand, they acknowledge that the Geza uprising is no different from what happened in 2017, the military coup. The people of Zimbabwe were conned into siding with one side of Zanu PF faction, and were led to believe that doing so would be to their benefit. They'll be able to, in 2017, the main objective was, yes, let's remove Mugabe from power. Plus, and it is a big, important plus, we want to change, to have democratic changes so that we can finally dismantle the dictatorship that has allowed Mugabe to stay in power for all those 37 years. Because if you do not dismantle it, what is there to stop the next guy who comes in doing the same thing all over again? So it was not enough to just focus on Mugabe must go. We have to focus on how are we going to make sure that this does not happen again. So they accept that. And at the end of the day, they've got to admit it, that now 8 years since the 2017 military coup, they've seen no meaningful economic change or political change. The Mnangagwa faction of Zanu PF that took over after the coup changed the dictator himself and replaced him with Mnangagwa. But other than that, nothing else changed. In fact, some people have even argued that the Mugabe dictatorship was better than the Mnangagwa dictatorship. Because for one thing, corruption has gone into overdrive. So nothing was accomplished. The people's hopes of getting reforms implemented to dismantle the dictatorship were never realized. So this Geza revolution, the question is it going to be a repeat of 2017? And the honest truth is, it is a repeat. Here is Geza himself explaining what he expects to accomplish with this so-called Geza revolution.
Saka muno wina sei imuchore wachinje.
Aiwaga. Mirani kutauri imwe zvinhu zvinoitika. Hani ndiri kutokutaurira. Kurauza kuti hatina kupusaka because ndiri kutokutaurira kuti tozviziva. You know, takapusaka ndisikakutauriri zvese. We'll deal with this situation at the appropriate time. But ndiri kutotaura kuti commander vaMnangagwa, right, navaChiwenga, handidi, right, ngavadissolve polity bureau tikwane isu vari vechiunhu, ngavadissolve cabinet inozinana kazembe vana soda vanani havambozviutaka pane kuti vanhu ivavo vane kambamuda vanani, why do you hate your comrades? Kune mageneral, kune retired CIO vakawanda, kune retired commissioners of police and other senior officers vakawanda havadiwe.
Maybe the president is looking at capacity and capability.
Bullshit. Vana grade 7 ane capacity and capability. Grade 7. Oita busy yokuti nhasi aitwa minister of state mangwana provincial minister isiripo. We are not apologetic about it. Chinhu chedu ichi toda kutopinda ndoda kuti president vanipo zimota varipo toda mabodyguards ini.
But you've got your own cars. You've got a hotel at your house that you built in Sanyat. Why do you want all this?
I want to be rewarded as well, not to be used like a political condom all the time. I'm not a political condom. And urikoda vana mahiya vaya vana vamwe.
Well, he could not have made it more explicit. This is about power. If the 31st March uprising is successful, Geza and company want a VP Chiwenga to be the president. They've not made a secret about it. That is what they want. It is shocking how some people have conveniently ignored what Geza and friends have said and cherry-picked to fit their own argument. Here is one well-known Zimbabwean face that many people will be familiar with, trying to justify why he and his group will participate in the so-called Geza revolution.
We must ensure that an election that is held in Zimbabwe in 2028 at least is held under the minimum standards for holding democratic elections as provided for in SADC and in our own constitution.
I want to stop it there because that is an important point. How many elections have we Zimbabweans participated in that did not meet those standards? The 2023 elections were condemned by both SADC and the AU election observers as failing to meet Zimbabwe's own election legal law requirements and constitutional requirements and SADC's own guidelines. And yet Zimbabweans participated in those 2023 elections. And it is important here also to underline that as much as SADC, in my view, would have denied Zanu PF legitimacy if the opposition had not participated, they could not, in this case, deny Zanu PF legitimacy. When you're looking at a situation where the opposition participated in their numbers, Nelson Chamisa managed to con his followers to participate telling them that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Triple C was going to win big. They believed him. They participated in their millions. Nearly 2 million Chamisa supporters participated in 2023. SADC had no choice but to shrug their shoulders and walk away. They could not deny Zanu PF legitimacy when the opposition and their supporters had participated in those large numbers. That is a point that must be emphasized again and again. Why some people keep ignoring it beggars belief. But it is a historic fact. It must be acknowledged. Let's listen to his argument why he and his colleagues will participate in the so-called Geza 31st March uprising.
Zimbabwe. We are opposed, as we have said previously, to the extension of the term limits. If Mnangagwa wants to remain as first secretary and the president of Zanu PF, that is their problem. They are an institution of which we have no interest on who leads it. But when it comes to the national leadership, we must have an election in 2028. This is why, as the Zimbabwe Communist Party, we support the forces who are opposed to the 2030 agenda. We explained in the previous video that our support is not about finding ourselves of trying to find some accommodation in one faction of Zanu PF. But we support the anti-2030 agenda in principle, that our history teaches us that we should not get to a point where we think it is an individual that is meant to lead for life. No. We are for collective leadership.
Well, I'll stop it there again. So the argument here is that he and his Communist Party friends and colleagues will participate in the so-called Geza 31st March uprising to stop Mnangagwa amending the constitution to allow himself to stay in power until 2030, i.e., they're participating to stop the ED2030 agenda. Let's understand what he's doing here. The truth of the matter is the 2030 agenda can still be stopped without participating in the Geza uprising. It must be emphasized here that the Geza uprising is a fixed package. It's a total package. You cannot cherry pick. If you participate in the Geza uprising and is successful, yes, you'll have stopped Mnangagwa amending the constitution. But Geza and friends have made it clear that if it is successful, they will appoint their own president, Chiwenga. this whole idea that somehow, if it's successful, we can negotiate with them to implement reforms is a non-starter. We saw it happen in 2017. Mnangagwa was not going to implement any meaningful democratic reforms at the risk of losing power, him and his colleagues losing power. They just staged a coup, risking their very lives. And if you seriously think with 8 months later, they will hold a free, fair, and credible elections and put the power that they had risked so much to secure on the line, you are really being naive. The same applies to Geza and friends. If they stop Mnangagwa by forcing him out, they will appoint their own president, Chiwenga. And we don't have to go back and ask who is Chiwenga. We know him. He is just another Zanu PF thug, no different from Mnangagwa and Mugabe before him. And this whole idea that somehow having successfully pushed the Geza revolution, the 2030 uprising, and therefore then find yourself in the 2028 elections, we can have free, fair, and credible elections then, is naive. How are you going to get free, fair, and credible elections then? Because Chiwenga and company will not implement reforms. And having supported them, like it or not, you have given them legitimacy. Just as the massive hundreds of the thousands of people who supported the 2017 coup gave Mnangagwa and company legitimacy. Chiwenga would feel that he has been given legitimacy and he will not implement any reforms. Mnangagwa did not even bother to form the GNU. But even if Chiwenga was to say, okay, we'll definitely form the GNU, I can tell you now that that GNU will not implement any meaningful democratic changes. But to come back to the issue of, which is what Mabhena emphasized there, they would want to make sure that the 2028 elections are free, fair, and credible. They meet the minimum requirements as stated in the SADC and the AU report of the 2023 elections. That is commendable. That is as it should be. But what must also be said here is that as much as even if there was no Geza uprising and Mnangagwa was pushing his 2030 agenda, the requirement is he has got to amend the constitution. He can get parliament to do it. He's got now 2/3 majority in parliament, in the Senate, everything. So he can push that through. But they still have to put before the people of Zimbabwe a referendum where the people can approve that amendment. That is when you can also insist that that referendum cannot go ahead without basic minimum guarantees that the process is free, fair, and credible. That we are following the legal requirements and constitutional requirements and meeting the SADC guidelines on free, fair, and credible processes. We already have a report that says 2023 elections were not free, fair, and credible. So let's implement those reforms. If you can force Zanu PF to implement reforms for the referendum, you can also force them to implement reforms for the 2028 elections. And I believe that it will be much easier to force the Mnangagwa administration to implement those reforms than to force the Chiwenga administration, whom we have just cooperated with, and who would have rewarded you with a number of gravy train seats on this GNU to entice you to keep participating, to give them confidence. I believe that forcing the Chiwenga administration to implement reforms would be harder than forcing Mnangagwa to implement reforms. If Mnangagwa goes ahead with a referendum with no reforms, then the people must not participate. Let's remember here that if the opposition had not participated in the 2023 elections and SADC had come with a damning report on the process, SADC would have taken the necessary, the next logical step and denied Zanu PF legitimacy. The biggest challenge here is to get the sellout opposition to stop participating in these flawed elections. That is the bottom line. And that fight is actually what we are talking about here. Getting the opposition to stop participating in this Geza revolution is just as tough as stopping the sellout opposition participating in the flawed elections in 2023, in 2018, and 2013. They participated in all these elections knowing fully well that the process was flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they were giving Zanu PF legitimacy. That point must be acknowledged and dealt with. We are facing here a challenge where the opposition would want to participate in Geza's so-called uprising in the hope that if he is successful, he will, or the Chiwenga administration that emerges out of it, will remember them and give them some gravy train seats in the proposed GNU. It will be a GNU, Government of National Unity, that will implement no meaningful reforms at all. And come 2028, as much as Mabhena is telling us that they would insist that the elections are held meeting the conditions of free, fair, and credible process, they will participate in those elections without even a token reform implemented, as they have done in the past. I repeat, the biggest challenge to Zimbabwe hopes of attaining meaningful political change these last 25 years has not been so much Zanu PF itself, but rather the opposition and their naive, gullible, and ignorant supporters. The ease with which leaders like Nelson Chamisa have been able to con their supporters to participate in flawed elections is one of the things that have to be deeply regrettable. And yet we have been helpless to stop it. So let me reiterate. We don't need to participate in Geza's uprising to stop Mnangagwa's 2030 agenda. We can stop it by making sure that either he implements the democratic reforms to make sure that the referendum to approve the constitutional amendment is free, fair, and credible, or we don't participate. If he does implement the reforms, I can rest assure you that Zanu PF will not win that referendum. So participating in Geza's uprising is just compromising with one faction of Zanu PF out of greed. And it's not going to benefit the people of Zimbabwe in any meaningful way. That is the truth. Think about it. Thank you very much, and have a good night.